Welcome to Dark News.
Dark News.
Oh, shit.
They'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves.
BBC posted their first article about Silk Road and Tor. Oh, I don't have to go to the street corner and get shot?
I think Bitcoin means 1,000 Silk Roads.
This is a show about cryptocurrencies,
anonymity,
and uncensorship.
All right, welcome to Dark News. We are live. Today is May 6, 2014, and I am the host of Dark News, Kristov Atlas. Looking forward to today's show. We will be talking about, of course, the dark markets as usual. We'll be talking about a few news stories, a little bit of follow-up about MAIDSAFE. We'll be talking about how to market Bitcoin to the masses, talking about Multisig Escrow in the dark markets, and we'll be answering your questions as well. So if you have any questions that you'd like to have answered today, feel free to jump into the Google Hangout through the YouTube link, and you can use the Q&A app there. And you can also post questions through Twitter. You can either send them to @DarkNewsShow on Twitter or just use hashtag Dark News. And you can really send those questions through Twitter using the Dark News hashtag at any time of the week. And just a reminder, if you're enjoying the show, I would love for you to support the show. So feel free to do so. You can send a Bitcoin tip, a Dogecoin tip, and I'm thinking about setting up a Darkcoin tip address as well. And if you'd like to do more of like a monthly donation thing, a subscription thing, we also have the Patreon account on top of that. Thanks so much to the recent tippers. I've seen a lot of Dogecoin tips recently, and I've been really impressed with the generosity and reciprocity of the Dogecoin community. And related to Dogecoin, I watched the NASCAR race this past Sunday, and I don't know if I've ever watched a NASCAR race before. I've seen snippets of it on TV, but I must say it was quite fun. The Dogecar was very vroom and much number one, so I'd like to see some more of that in the future for sure. And congrats to the driver, Josh Wise, for his completion of the race. He ended up in number 20th place, but he also got up to about 4th at the top. Got cheated out of a few places at the end there with a caution flag, and he did not wreck, unlike many of the NASCAR cars that were in the race. So good fun. So let's start off by reviewing the dark markets. And let's talk about the tail of the tape for the US dollar. All these prices are relative to the US dollar. This is what you can buy with $1 US. So not much of a change as it has been for the last several weeks in gold and silver. Dollar lost about 1% relative to both of those. Bitcoin, the dollar went up about 3% relative to Bitcoin and lost about 6% relative to Darkcoin. You can now buy 0.6 Darkcoins with every dollar, down from 0.64 Darkcoins per dollar last week. Darkcoin has seemed to stabilize around the 10th rank in the cryptocurrencies. It's up to 10 from 11th place last week. Anoncoin lost some ground to the dollar. You can now buy 1.71 Anoncoins with every US dollar, up from 1.45. And let's see, we also have Fedora Coin, which also lost ground to the dollar, about 12%. And that has sunk back down to around 65th in the rankings. Now, I think Anoncoin, if you're a speculator, is an interesting vehicle for speculation. I'm noticing that Anoncoins, for the first time in a while, are being actually mined, and the price seems to be sinking pretty low. And what we saw with Darkcoin, we'll talk about Darkcoin in a moment, but there was a surge in Darkcoin, and I think we could see something like that with Anoncoin if there is a surge in development, and we're potentially anticipating something like that. Anoncoin's plan is to adopt the zero cash technology and become a privacy-centric cryptocurrency. So if you are a speculator, I would keep a close eye on opportunities related to a non-coin. And finally, the dollar lost some ground relative to 22 LR rounds this week and gained some ground with the 9mm rounds. Those are going to fluctuate quite a bit over time, but what I anticipate over the long run is that we will see an overall decline for the dollar relative to ammo. And not much of a change for the GSBDA market cap. It went up about 1% just due to gold and silver relative to the dollar this week. Now let's take a quick look at the Darkcoin market price. So Darkcoin, it had a big surge a bit earlier towards the end of April, and this is the chart just for the last month. So what we can see here is it did a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a correction after that surge from late April. And then from the 4th of May up through today, we've seen a bit of a surge due to, I think in part due to some media coverage that Darkcoin has been getting. It was featured in amongst five total technologies in the Bitcoin space that can improve privacy for users. And so there's a nice section about Darkcoin, and some of the other technologies that were covered were also Dark Wallet, shared coin from blockchain.info, and a few other things like that. I think Zero Coin was probably in there as well. And so as I mentioned before, here's some tracking of the prices that I've been doing. This is one of the benefits of going over the markets every week. So I started tracking this in about mid-March or so. The blue line here is Bitcoin, so the number of dollars you can get for each millibit, and red line is Darkcoin, and the green line is Fedora coin measured in megatips, or 1 million tips. Tips is the unit of the standard unit for Fedora coin. And finally, just added in here towards the end, we also have a non-coin with this little yellow line towards the end. Now, what you generally will see with many cryptocurrencies is that their value will closely track Bitcoin's value, because they're not all that different from Bitcoin. And so what you will generally expect to see is a lot of them will closely follow along with Bitcoin relative to the dollar. Of course, they will oscillate a bit here and there, but that's mainly what you'll expect to see. When people decide that certain cryptocurrencies become useless, then their value drops precipitously. But as long as they're sort of still in the fold, mostly they track Bitcoin. You can see Darkcoin has been doing that very, very closely from mid-March up until April 22nd. And then you can see there's a huge divergence with Darkcoin shooting way up close to $2 per Darkcoin, and then a little bit of a correction, and now it's heading back up again. And Bitcoin has stayed pretty low relative to that. Bitcoin's still in the doldrums. Now, why did that happen on April 22nd? Well, that's when the Darkcoin developers released a release candidate software for their Darkcoin client that included the DarkSend technology. Prior to that, it had been purely in beta, and so this was a major milestone for Darkcoin, and that's what led speculators to jump on Darkcoin at that point. So I think we could see something like that in a non-coin in the near future when they finally get around to implementing the zero cash technology. So that will do it for the dark markets for today.
It's not about the money, money, money. We don't need your money, money, money. We just want to make the world dance. Forget about the price tag. Ain't about the cha-ching.
Now, I wanted to do some follow-up related to MAIDSAFE, which I talked about in last week's show. So I had a couple viewers, Paige and John Light, who are both associates of mine, and they let me know that, hey, you don't have quite the whole story with this MAIDSAFE thing. There is a strong incentive or an incentive at least, for users to jump into MAIDSAFE, and it's around this SafeCoin that people were able to buy recently. So let's take just a quick look at this description of SafeCoin. And basically, SafeCoin is supposed to be the proof of resource unit in the MAIDSAFE network. So I'm looking at this graph over here on the right, or this diagram. So you have people called farmers, and they're similar to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency miners in that they are providing some kind of resource to the network and they're getting paid for it. But instead of mining something, what they're providing is they are providing CPU for people to run programs, storage for storing files, little slivers of files that you find on the MAIDSAFE network. Of course, they're providing bandwidth as well, and they need to have uptime. They need to be online quite a bit in order to be useful to the MAIDSAFE network. So that's what the farmer provides to the network, and the network in turn is going to constantly measure and verify that these resources are being provided. They want to make sure that all of these resources that are being provided are exceeding the usage that's taking place by the farmer, making sure that they're not using up more resources than they're putting into the network. And the farmer in turn is going to store data and provide SafeCoins. The network is going to store data with the farmer, and it's going to provide SafeCoins at random to random farmers. And those SafeCoins make it to the farmer. So this is the incentive for people to jump into the MAIDSAFE network. Whether they want to necessarily store their data or not, this is an incentive for people to become farmers. Now, of course, I'm sure that there will be a close relationship between usage of the network and the amount of SafeCoins that you can get out of it as being a farmer. So that doesn't necessarily complete the circle in terms of why people would want to use MAIDSAFE, but it is definitely an important thing to understand if you're trying to understand MAIDSAFE and trying to understand the value of a SafeCoin. So thank you very much to the viewers for pointing that out to me. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is just to read a couple of snippets from this article that was posted by Daniel Krawisz, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Apologize to Daniel if I got that incorrect. But so he wrote this article back in the end of April called How to Market Bitcoin. And I thought it was quite good, quite a bit of insight there. And, it's very controversial as well, but I wanted to just draw your attention to a couple snippets, and of course I will link to the entire article in the description of the video if you want to give it a closer look. So he's talking about how Bitcoin adoption works and how Bitcoin can be marketed towards the masses. So Daniel writes, does Bitcoin need to be sanitized and separated from its anarchist black market roots in order to become acceptable to the general population? Must Bitcoin become an upstanding citizen and saddle itself with KYC, that's Know Your Customer, requirements and capital controls? Absolutely not. Someone who wants Bitcoin for drugs or porn will tend to be a more loyal and committed Bitcoin proponent than someone who just uses it to buy shoes. Therefore, Bitcoin should not be shy about the black market. Black market businesses should be seen as potential early adopters. I will be more convinced that Bitcoin's place is secure when drug cartels start using it than when Amazon.com starts accepting it. There is no reason to treat the black market as something shameful. It is a source of wealth that we all depend on, directly or indirectly. If you love Bitcoin and foresee yourself growing rich off of it, then you should love its black market uses as well. And he goes on to talk some more about the black market and money. Daniel writes, anything that is good at being money is good on black market, and anything that makes Bitcoin less useful on the black market makes it less useful, period. Good money doesn't know the difference between the white and black market. Making Bitcoin less useful on the black market would require making it less decentralized, less anonymous, or grant its users less control over their money. And just the last little bit that I wanted to read to you here, the solution to Bitcoin's regulatory issues is simple. Ignore the entrepreneurs who are complaining about it. They're just trying to earn dollars, as in US dollars, not money. Someone who is trying to earn Bitcoins will be much more interested in the long-term future of Bitcoin and would prefer that Bitcoin not seek mainstream approval so as to achieve a more stunning victory later. So I thought that was a very, very cool article by Daniel. As I said, you can check it out by checking out the link in the description as well. And I just wanted to talk for a moment about this idea of Bitcoin and the value to the black market and the value to people that are not within the black market. Due to the design of Bitcoin, where it has this open ledger of transactions, I don't want to say that I'm absolutely certain about this conclusion, but I'm very skeptical that they would be otherwise. I believe that it is not possible for the average Bitcoin user to have privacy while adopting these mechanisms, making these changes to Bitcoin in the name of various euphemisms like know your customer, anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, customer protection, these kinds of slang. What these people are proposing is they want to make some fundamental changes to Bitcoin to reduce privacy for a certain set of people. But because of the way that Bitcoin is designed, really the only way that you can get privacy with this open ledger, and when everyone has a copy of what's going on the internet, and this is to some degree also the case for the internet in general, is that privacy is equivalent to anonymity. Anonymity is all about it being able to hide within a crowd of people that you can be mistaken for. And so if you want to reduce the privacy for a certain set of people on the internet or within a cryptocurrency, there's really no mechanism to do that without damaging the privacy of other people on that system, because they require on that group of people to add to their privacy. It's all about the crowd, and you cannot remove privacy from part of the crowd without sacrificing it for the crowd overall. So this is my contention about Bitcoin and privacy, and I think that the people who are suggesting that we need to strip privacy from Bitcoin really do not understand the fundamental importance of privacy for financial transactions, and they do not understand cryptocurrencies. They don't understand this relationship between privacy and anonymity. I don't believe that we'll be able to obtain privacy on a peer-to-peer basis, privacy from companies, privacy from corporations, privacy from snoops and creeps and stalkers and government surveillance and all this other stuff without if we're going to damage the anonymity portion. I just don't believe it's possible. So this is something that's very important to understand. I'm certainly open to debate about it, but of course, none of the people that talk about this issue from the devil's advocate perspective seem to have any technical understanding of this stuff. So I'm still waiting on that debate. So another little news item that I want to mention in the dark market space. So this is from deep.web, and they have multisig guides. They list 9 different dark markets. These are markets that run on things like Tor or I2P, and they generally accept Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency as a payment mechanism. And all 9 of these markets, the newest one to be added to the list is Evolution, which I've highlighted here at the bottom. They all have multi-sig payments. In other words, there's an escrow mechanism in there that if there's some kind of dispute between the seller and the buyer, they can go to an independent third party to arbitrate and come to some kind of conclusion about the transaction. And it's just a way of protecting the sellers from the buyers and the buyers from the sellers. It's very tricky to do these kind of transactions and on an anonymous basis, but it's also very important that they happen as anonymously as possible. And so escrow is a way of helping along these transactions, making the market more liquid and just work better overall. So we have themarketplace.i2p, Black Bank Market, Hydra Marketplace, Bitwasp, Tor Bazaar, Cloud9, Cannabis Road, 1776 Market, and Evolution. And I'm not seeing Silk Road 2.0 or some of the other big marketplaces in here yet. They may be still working on that, or perhaps this website hasn't listed them because they don't have a guide for that particular marketplace yet. I'm not exactly sure. Out of all of these, the one that I'm the most familiar with is Evolution. which is relatively new, but I've been hearing a lot of positive reviews about it. I don't know exactly, people don't say what they're buying on the Evolution market when they give it a favorable review. So it could be a mug or it could be some cocaine, I don't really know, but I've been hearing good things about Evolution, and I'm very happy to see that they are using multi-sig payments, and I appreciate Deep.web for providing these multi-sig guides to buyers and sellers. I think that is absolutely fantastic. So that's all of the news stories that I wanted to cover for today. Just wanted to do a little bit of news, and we'll spend a bit longer today working on the Q&A. So again, if you'd like to submit your questions for answering, you can do that through the Google Hangout, and you can also tweet your questions to @DarkNewsShow or #DarkNews on Twitter. All right, so we got a few good questions here. So let's start off with this question that I received during the week. I'm going to throw it up on the screen here so you can check it out. So this comes to us from Ecuadorial Bitcoins. I assume a Bitcoin enthusiast or business in Ecuador. And his question is about two-factor authentication and privacy. So he or she asks, is my phone number in any way associated with an account if I enable two-factor authentication with Google Auth? Is two-factor authentication anonymous? So this is a very complicated question to try to answer, but I'm gonna take my best shot at it. So in order to kind of help you understand the breadth and the scope of this particular question, I thought we could take a look a little bit at one of the more popular two-factor authentication schemes that's out there, and this is with Google Authenticator. So this is from the Google Authenticator entry on Wikipedia, and so Google Authenticator is a two-factor auth app, sometimes branded as two-step authentication. It provides a 6-digit one-time password. So this is a number with 6 digits that you only use once ever to authenticate to a website or some kind of service. And users must provide this 6-digit number in addition to their username and password in order to log into Google services or other websites that use Google Authenticator. And I use Google Authenticator for websites like Kristov and Coinbase and a whole host of other different websites and services. So let's talk about what a typical use case looks like for Google Authenticator. So first, users are going to install the Authenticator app on their smartphone, and they'll log into a site that uses two-factor authentication. And when they do that, they're going to provide their username and their password, and they'll run the Authenticator app on some type of device. It could be a smartphone, it could be a tablet. It's typically one of these kind of more mobile devices. And when they open up Google Authenticator, it will produce a 6-digit one-time password. And if you leave the app open for long enough, I think it's around 30 seconds or so, it actually cycles over to the next 6-digit one-time password. And with many of these two-factor authentication devices, a lot of people also have RSA secure ID tokens that you put on your keychain. They also roll over every 10, 20, 30 seconds, whatever it is. And on a lot of these devices, once it's rolled over to the next number, any numbers that have previously appeared on the display are no longer good. It's kind of synchronized with the clock of the service that you're trying to authenticate with. And so you need to have a current number, not just a number that appeared on the device once. And that's just so that if someone took a peek at your device or whatever, they couldn't write down the number, they couldn't jot it down, and then a few days later use that to break into your account. They actually need to have it within 30 seconds of when they're trying to access your account. So in order for this to, so the user is going to provide their 6-digit thing, their token. They're going to give their username and password, and the site is going to check for the correctness of this and authenticate the user if all of that is accurate. Now, in order for this to work, a setup operation has to be performed ahead of time before you ever try to do this two-factor authentication. At some point in the past, you're going to have to kind of collaborate with the website, and the website is going to provide a shared secret key to you over some secure channel, and it's going to be stored in the Authenticator app. And then that secret key will be used to generate these numbers that you'll use to log in with in the future. And the way that this typically works is you'll start out with having an account that only is authenticated with a username and password. There'll be some section of the website related to your account settings or whatever for two-factor auth or security or whatever they want to call it. They'll give you, and then they'll say, do you want to set this up with Google Authenticator? They'll usually show you a QR code, which you can then scan with your mobile phone or tablet or whatever it is. With Google Authenticator, Google Authenticator will scan the QR code with your camera on your device. It will decode that information as the secret key that's being provided to you by the website, and then you're all set to go. So the key thing to understand about this two-factor authentication is that merely knowing the username and password is not sufficient to break into a user's account. The attacker also needs to have knowledge of the secret, the shared secret, the secret that's being shared between the user's Google Authenticator mobile device and the website that they're trying to access, or they'll need physical access to the device running the Google Authenticator app. An alternative route is a man-in-the-middle attack if the computer being used for the login process is compromised by some malware. Then the username, password, and one-time two-factor authentication password can be captured by the Trojan, and then it can initiate its own login session or monitor the communication between the user of the site or whatever. So if your device that you're logging in with is compromised, or if your two-factor authentication device is compromised, then this is not going to work, but it adds extra stuff that the attacker would have to do in order to get into your account. Now, in order to understand some of the security and privacy concerns around this Google Authenticator app, I'm going to refer to this blog post on the Tor blog. The blog post is from April 2nd, 2014, and it's entitled Mission Impossible: Hardening Android for Security and Privacy. So this blog post says, Android is the most popular mobile platform in the world. Unfortunately, mobile devices are, in general, and Android devices in particular, they're not designed with privacy in mind. In fact, they're seemingly been designed with nearly the opposite goal: to make it easy for third parties, telecommunication companies, sophisticated state-sized adversaries, and even random hackers to extract all manner of personal information from the user. This includes the full content of personal communications with business partners and loved ones. Worse still, by default, the user is given very little in the way of control or even informed consent about what information is being collected and how. So a lot of this is around selecting a particular piece of hardware to install Google Authenticator on. So if you really want to secure your mobile device, the Tor blog says that it's really necessary to carefully select your hardware. First and foremost, it's essential that the carrier's baseband firmware is completely isolated from the rest of the platform. Because your cell phone's baseband does not authenticate the network in order to, this is so that you can allow roaming and other things like that. Any random hacker with their own cell phone network can exploit these backdoors and use them to install malware on their device. Now, what they mean by this is there's this baseband firmware that helps you get onto the cell phone network, and it's actually not that expensive to come up with a fake cell tower. You don't have to build a big tower and put it in the sky. It's not $1 million project. It's like $100 or $1,000 project to come up with a little device that just transmits stuff wirelessly. It needs to have the right software and whatnot, but this is not beyond the means of many attackers. So this baseband firmware, it's not open source. No one is able to look at it. In fact, the people that make this software try to often make it very difficult to reverse engineer. So even if people want to look at that after the fact, it's difficult to do so. It's riddled with vulnerabilities. There's so many reports about people finding vulnerabilities in this baseband software. It's not actively patched in terms of security vulnerabilities. Oftentimes, it often runs on your mobile device with heightened privileges because it's such a low-level piece of software that it often requires substantial access to resources on the device, including, all the files that are on there, running with high file privileges and so forth. And so if someone sets up one of these fake baseband cell towers, then they can trick your device to connect to it and then exploit these vulnerabilities and easily get root access or administrative access to your device. So these things are quite prone to being hacked in this particular way. Now, how do we possibly deal with this? While there are projects underway to determine which handsets actually provide true hardware baseband isolation, in other words, they're trying to isolate this baseband code from the rest of the operating system. At the time of writing, there's very little public information available on this topic. Hence, the only safe option remains a device with no cell phone network support whatsoever. Although you can get cell phone network connectivity if you need it, provided by a separate device. So for the purposes of this post, they recommend the Wi-Fi only version of the 2013 Google Nexus 7 tablet. And if you need a cell phone network access, then what you can do is you can get a cell modem device that provides a Wi-Fi access point for data services only. So tethering, basically, you have a Wi-Fi only device, you have a cell modem device that is not directly connected to the device, but it's tethered via Wi-Fi to share this cell phone connection. The devices, these devices do not have microphones. In some cases, they don't have fine-grained GPS units because they're not able to make emergency calls. They also are available with prepaid plans. That's hard to say 3 times fast. That's a good thing because it's easier for you to buy it more anonymously or with more privacy than if you have to connect it to your credit card or whatever. You can pay with cash for rates around $20 to $30 per month, and for about 2 gigs per month of 4G data, which is not too shabby. So if you absolutely need to get on the cell phone network, if you can't rely on Wi-Fi devices or Wi-Fi connections, then you can get one of these little cell modem units to tether to. In this way, you achieve true baseband isolation with no risk of audio or network surveillance, baseband exploits, or provider backdoors. Effectively, the cell modem is just another untrusted router in a long chain of untrustworthy internet infrastructure. I do note that even if the cell unit does not contain a fine-grained GPS chip in there, you still sacrifice location privacy while you're using it, because over an extended period of time, it will be possible for attackers, people that are snooping on your connection, to make inferences about your physical activity, etc. In summary, two-factor authentication, there's multiple ways to do two-factor authentication. You can do it through SMS. Obviously, if you provide a cell phone number that's going to be connected to whatever identity that you have linked to your cell phone. Most people, you can get a prepaid phone, perhaps your carrier is still going to be collecting some data about where you are and so forth. They may be able to infer who you are based on who you're calling, data that you may be sending with the cell phone, etc. So it's very difficult to get a anonymous cell phone connection. So if you're authenticating with SMS text messages, then obviously that's not very anonymous. If you wanted to do it with this something like Google Authenticator, Google, when you scan in the little secret key through the QR code into Google Authenticator, it's not exchanging any information with the website or with Google about your device at that point. It's not, in fact, the Authenticator app it shouldn't be sending any information out ever to Google or to anyone else. Now, one challenge with this is that the Google Authenticator app is not open source. It's proprietary. I've read that there is a clone of the Google Authenticator app. I can't remember the name of it offhand. Perhaps I'll link to it in the description later on. But this is actually an open source version where you can kind of look at the code. Anyone can look at the code if they know how to read code, and they can see if it's doing any funny business in terms of connecting to the internet. But so we can't say for sure exactly what Google Authenticator is doing since we don't have the source code, but it ought not be connecting to the internet in any way. It should just be, scanning in QR codes through your camera, displaying stuff to you, and that's it. So the issue with the Google Authenticator is it may be sending data out, we don't know, and the devices that you're going to run Google Authenticator on typically are not very secure, as the Tor blog talked about. So in order to do two-factor authentication more securely, more privately, what you would want to do is you would want to have a device that is purely dedicated to running Google Authenticator in an offline fashion. It's not connected to the cell phone network. If you absolutely must do that, obviously they talked about doing the external cell phone cell device for tethering. So Wi-Fi only device, and ideally you wouldn't even connecting to the Wi-Fi. Once you get the app on there, you can even do that you can connect your device usually to your computer and install apps through USB or whatever it is, instead of actually downloading it. So ideally you just never connect this device to the internet. It stays offline, and the only interaction that it has with other devices is through the camera scanning in these QR codes. And then in that case, you absolutely can do two-factor authentication in an anonymous fashion, because the device that is allowing you to authenticate is not connecting to the internet. It's an offline device. Now, I'll throw out one caveat there, which is two caveats. One is that if you are using the same identity over time, whether it's a blockchain.info account or a Cryptsy account or whatever it is, Gmail account, the longer that you use that account to do different stuff, the more that you're building up an identity and associating that identity with your activity. And using the same two-factor authentication login, or so when you install Google Authenticator, you're going to get a secret key. If you keep using that secret key to authenticate to devices, then that is building up some sense of an identity over time, because someone that's able to see all of your traffic and track you and so forth, they'll at least be able to infer that you are using the same secret key to authenticate to these different logins. So that's one ping against anonymity. Something that I talk about in my book, Anonymous Bitcoin, is you generally want to use accounts, any kind of account, as for as short of time as possible if you're trying to do it anonymously. Ideally, for every single transaction that you do, you'd create a new account and set up new information for it. And so in that kind of instance, you'd have to set up a new Google Authenticator, add a new login account to Google Authenticator each time you set up a new account and so forth. And that way it wouldn't harm your anonymity. It's just that when you use two-factor authentication, potentially it is encouraging you behaviorally to use the same accounts over and over again, because it's yet another thing that you have to do in order to roll over to a new account. The other thing that I was going to add with regards to two-factor authentication is regarding entropy. So some two-factor authentication schemes, I don't think this is the case with Google Authenticator, but some of them require the device that you're running your Authenticator app on to introduce some entropy into this code that's being produced for two-factor authentication. And in that case, it might be possible for an attacker to kind of tamper with the entropy or the randomness that's supposed to go into these codes, and then develop some type of identity for you, or infer an identity for you, based on messing with that entropy. So that's a bit of a more of an advanced area, but I thought it's worth mentioning that these devices, fundamentally, we're in an abysmal kind of state with hardware security, in that we're not able to properly audit the security of our devices. It's very easy for people to tamper with the hardware, either when the company is designing it, as in the case was the Clipper chip plan that NSA and other agencies had a few decades ago, or to, there's also some evidence that the NSA has been seizing packages in the mail, tampering with the hardware, and then sending them back on their merry way. If you ever order a computer and it gets temporarily delayed in Virginia, I would definitely be pretty suspicious about that. So yeah, these devices that we have it's really tricky, basically impossible right now to try and get a device that we can prove is going to be secure. So there's all manners of tampering that can possibly go on. But if you take some of the steps that we talked about from this Tor blog, in terms of having a dedicated, mostly offline or entirely offline device that's running your Google Authenticator, that will help you out quite a bit in terms of being able to do your two-factor authentication in a more anonymous fashion. So I would definitely recommend that, and it does not require very much at all. Now, this blog article goes into tremendous detail about what you can do to further secure your Android device. I haven't personally tried to go through all these steps. It's quite involved, and I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to be, I don't know how doable it is going to be for the average Bitcoin or tech enthusiast. It might be for more intermediate or advanced users. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a long page, so you can take a look at it if you want to do some more securing of your device. Certainly wouldn't say it would be a waste of time, but I haven't tried to do it myself, so I can't say for sure whether it's any good. So I hope that gives you some good insight into two-factor authentication and how to do that more anonymously. Haven't heard this anywhere else, so I hope that is novel and useful to you. Let's take a look at some more questions for the show. One is from Alan on Twitter. Alan asks, what are your thoughts on the volatility of Bitcoin? So this is obviously an economics question, which is not necessarily my forte. If you're looking for a couple really great economists in the area of cryptocurrencies, I would definitely recommend John Matanis, who is on the board of the Bitcoin Foundation and also has some very, very wise insight into the nature of financial privacy. Really admire the work that he's been doing in this area for a number of years. And the other one that I would recommend is Tur Demister, who is also on Twitter as well. And he's also a really excellent crypto economist. But I'll give you my thoughts. So Bitcoin volatility. Bitcoin has a fair amount of volatility for sure. There certainly have been periods where if you compare Bitcoin with some of the world's less successful fiat currencies, Bitcoin during those periods has actually had less volatility than those fiat currencies. So it's not the most volatile currency out there. And if you look at the charts for altcoins, they tend to be also quite a lot more volatile. You'll see jumps in those in 100% volatility, 200%, 1000% volatility in one day in some of these altcoins. And it's because they have a small market cap and their utility to the market is not yet fully determined. People haven't decided what is the use of these altcoins yet. And that's been the story of Bitcoin as well. It's got a relatively small market cap relative to something like the dollar, right? So if and when Bitcoin achieves a market cap comparable to what the dollar has today, it won't be equal to the dollar at that point, because the dollar will have to necessarily suffer in terms of market cap by that point. But if it gets to the point, there will be less volatility. One way to think about it is a lot of people make money off of speculative markets by trying to sway the market. They will try to send a market signal that says to other people, look, it's time to sell your Bitcoins, or it's time to buy Bitcoins. Once they have swayed the market, they will then reverse their position and they'll make money off of that. This happens all the time. It's been something that's been alleged against the people at BTC China recently, who, one of the CEOs or one of the founders of BTC China is the brother of the guy who invented Litecoin. And so the allegation has been BTC China has been intentionally creating a negative sentiment about Bitcoin in China in order to drive up the price of Litecoin. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's within the realm of possibility, certainly. So there's all these people that want to manipulate the market. And the smaller that the market is, the larger of number of people have the wealth that is necessary to actually sway the market in this fashion. Now, it's not easy money. You can totally miscalculate these market manipulations and you can lose money on it. So I don't want to imply that anyone with $10 million just gets to sway Bitcoin and they make easy money off of that. It's a calculated, careful thing that needs to be planned out in order to work, and maybe some luck is involved as well. But let's say it costs you $10 million to strongly sway a Bitcoin one day and move the market. Well, how many people in the world have $10 million that's liquid? A lot of them. There's a lot of people that have $10 million. Now, let's say that Bitcoin goes up tenfold and you now need $100 million in order to move the Bitcoin market and manipulate it. Well, there's a much smaller percentage of people that have $100 million. In fact, it's much less than a tenth of the number of people that have $10 million. And so every time that Bitcoin goes up another order of magnitude in terms of price, it's going to, and in terms of liquidity as well, it's going to require that much more money to try and manipulate the market. And you're going to see less and less volatility over time as fewer people can independently sway the market in this fashion. So that's just relative to the overall market cap of Bitcoin, and it's not special to Bitcoin whatsoever. It applies to lots of other things. On Dark News, I've been covering precious metals, gold and silver. They have a multi-trillion-dollar market caps, and a lot of people have alleged that there has been manipulation of those markets for a substantial amount of time. Part of that has to do with the interests of central banks, which obviously have a lot of money to manipulate with and a lot of fiat power to manipulate with as well. A part of it has to do with breaking gold and silver down into securities, and having certificates or pieces of paper that represent gold or silver that's not actually physically backed. That's part of it as well, and that hasn't really taken off with Bitcoin yet. But so lots of markets are prone to manipulation potentially, and Bitcoin is not special in that regard. If Bitcoin may have some properties that make it more prone to volatility. To a significant extent, I think that is kind of irrelevant in the digital age. If you want to sell goods for Bitcoin, then all you need to do is at the instant of sale, then you convert into dollars or whatever it is, and you just keep updating the price from moment to moment based on the volatility of the currency. And it's not a big deal in terms of digital transactions. People might say, well, what if it goes down 10% in 1 second? And the buyer expected to pay 1 Bitcoin, but then they ended up having to pay 1.1 Bitcoins because it just changed, and that kind of thing. Well, then software can adapt to that. People can say, I'm willing to pay between 1 and 1.1 Bitcoins for this thing. And so they'll give a range. And if it changes outside of that range, then the purchase won't go through. There's so many ways to potentially deal with this issue. Or the software can say, I want to pay exactly 1 Bitcoin, make the purchase when the exchange rate is at 1 Bitcoin. I don't need for it to go through this very instant. I want to go through in the next 5 hours, let's say. That would work fine for Amazon, for example, where, if in order to get your item shipped out a certain day, they tell you order within the next 20 hours and get it shipped out and have it arrive, 2 days from now or whatever. Well, then the order doesn't need to go through for the next 20 hours. It could happen at any point between now and then. And so if there is volatility, then, so there's so many different digital ways, software ways, and you don't even need to tell the user about this. Just be like, yeah, your order is in queue, and it has a X% chance of going through in the next 20 hours. Blah blah blah. And in the very unlikely case that it doesn't go through, we'll email you and notify you and update you about the situation. You can make this fairly transparent to users without needing to bother them to make a complicated on the second economics decisions about what they're going to buy. So I think a lot of that concern about volatility for the purpose of exchanging goods and services is not particularly valid, or it comes up due to a lack of creativity. This happens a lot. People say, well, oh God, if we change this thing, then how will we do this other thing? Because the first thing is how we've always done the second thing. And it's just like, well, how about you spend 60 seconds and think creatively about it, and you tell me how it's going to happen. That's generally my attitude towards people and they're panicked about change. But so those are a few of my thoughts about volatility. So we had a couple questions from Dogecoin Millionaire on Twitter. That's a great Twitter name. And Dogecoin Millionaire, first question was, what is the most profitable script and SHA-256 coins that you know? I am absolutely no mining expert. I don't do a lot of mining. I just do it for research purposes and not for profitability, but I know a little bit about it, so I'll give you a quick answer. So for those who are unfamiliar, there are these two hashing algorithms, SHA-256 and Script. Script is spelled SCRYPT. And both of them are they're mathematical functions, and most people had never heard of them prior to Bitcoin coming out. But these algorithms are used by various cryptocurrencies as a proof of work algorithm. They're busy work for miners to perform in order to compete to find a certain value, kind of in a lottery fashion, to actually win the next block award and actually get some more Bitcoins or Litecoins or whatever it is. Bitcoin uses SHA-256, as does Peercoin and some other coins. Script uses, Litecoin uses Script, and a lot of the other derivatives of Litecoin have also used Script. And there's all kinds of other hash algorithms out there as well, aside from SHA-256 and Script. Now, in terms of profitability, the website that I would direct you to is called coinwars.com. That's Coin Wars with a Z. And you can select certain parameters in terms of your electricity costs, what kind of hardware you're mining with, which algorithms you want to solve in order to do this mining. And it will give you some statistics and some predictions about profitability. So I took a look at this just before the show, and according to Coin Wars, the top 5 SHA-256 coins that you can mine in terms of profitability are C-Notes, Grostal coin, which I believe is most famous for being very difficult to pronounce, Maza coin, which is an interesting coin. It's like there's this Native American tribe that has adopted it as their official currency. And so it's one of it may be the first sovereign cryptocurrency. I'm not sure. Sovereign in the sense that there's some government that's acknowledged by someone that has chosen it for their currency. Number 4 is Bitcoin, and number 5 is Purecoin. Now, in terms of script profitability, at number 1 we have Neocoin, and then number 2 is Cryptographic Anomaly. 3 is Coino, 4 is Goldcoin, and number 5 is Noblecoin. So if you're interested in mining either of those, you can check them out. Now, these ASIC miners that you can use for Bitcoin, they only do SHA-256 mining, and they come in kind of a variety of forms. They have these little ones that are about yay big. They're rectangular. You plug them into USB ports. They're usually called block eruptors. And they're not hugely expensive, and they can't do a ton of hashing, but they can do some. They're much faster at SHA-256 hashing than GPUs are, or CPUs, or FPGAs, or any of these other hardware platforms for doing mining. And then there are also some other miners that are out there that are also ASICs that are bigger and beefier and can do a lot more than just these little block eruptors. So if you have an ASIC, I would guess that it's probably one of these block eruptors, but you could point it at one of these SHA-256 coins, such as C-Notes or Bitcoin or Purecoin. Some of the coins are merge mined, which means that you can it basically means that if you want to, if you set this up beforehand, you can mine multiple coins simultaneously. And so when you do find some coin, then you get it awarded in all of the different coins that you were mining because they are merge mined. So I believe Bitcoin and Namecoin are 2 coins that are merge mined. And there are lots of others. There's been a proposal recently for Dogecoin and Litecoin to become merge mined as well. Both of those are script based. Just because a coin is, let's say 2 different coins are script based, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily merge mined. It doesn't mean that you can mine both of those simultaneously with the same mining hardware. Only if they are intentionally merge mined, if they're set up to be merge mined by the creators of the coin, can you do this kind of simultaneous mining. So yeah, depending on what kind of hardware you have for mining, you can check out some of these different coins, and some of the profitability may be impacted by the fact that there's this merge mining, because with Bitcoin, for example, if you do Bitcoin and Namecoin at the same time, you can get a little bit more money off of it. In fact, the Namecoin that you get by merge mining Namecoin with Bitcoin, you can just immediately convert to Bitcoin, and it just gives you a little bit more Bitcoin than you otherwise would have gotten. So that's kind of neat. And we have one more question that I will answer today. This also comes from Dogecoin Millionaire to the Moon. Here's his question. What are some cool cryptocurrency ideas I can do with a Raspberry Pi? That's a good question. I haven't messed around with Raspberry Pis very much. I've never been into these embedded device things very much, but just a general idea with the Raspberry Pi is it's a very stripped down, basic little computer. You can, and the software is open source. You can buy them pretty cheaply. They're very modifiable, so you can add or subtract components based on what you want it to do. And they're just good for all kinds of different little hobbyist projects. And I've seen people do all kinds of things with Raspberry Pis. I have a wireless device called the Pineapple. I can't remember if it's based on Raspberry Pi or not, but it's based on one of these kind of like simplified, cheap hobbyist little computers. And what it does is it's a hacking tool for attacking Wi-Fi networks. And so it's just this little thing. It can be battery operated, or you can plug it in. It's got a couple antennas, and it's got some software and Linux loaded on there to hack Wi-Fi networks. So in the cryptocurrency space, there are a few things that you could do. I've seen Raspberry Pis that are Bitcoin ATMs or other cryptocurrency ATMs. I think that's quite interesting. And so you can hook up some additional paraphernalia to this thing you can hook up a Raspberry Pi to some additional software or hardware to allow it to accept cash or coins or whatever it is. I remember a couple years ago at the DEF CON conference, someone had created a Bitcoin ATM suitcase, and you would insert change, US dollar change, into a coin slot, and then it could send you some Bitcoins. I believe they did that with a Raspberry Pi. So an ATM is a pretty cool thing to do. I've also seen people build mining rigs where they attach these little USB mining eruptors to their Raspberry Pi, and they use that as a mining rig. So that's another thing you can do. The block eruptors are what are doing most of the work, for sure, in terms of finding the Bitcoins. So the computer that you hook them up to, it doesn't necessarily have to be very sophisticated. It just has to do some very basic stuff in terms of communicating with your mining pool or the Bitcoin network or whatever it is that you need to communicate with. So it's relatively non-intensive computation. Another idea that I had, I don't know if this idea is any good, but I just thought it was kind of neat. I'd love to see someone build a coin join or a coin swap machine that does Bitcoining or other cryptocurrency mixing. So let's say you go to a Bitcoin conference and people need to do some payments at the conference. What you could have is you could have this machine, and you could have maybe an app that people, like a wallet app that people install on their phones. People go to the machine and they stop by and they say, okay, I'm going to pay, I just bought a t-shirt. I'm going to pay this dude X number of Bitcoins. And people just keep coming up to the machine. And then when it hits some critical mass, the machine can then initiate a series of coin join or coin swap transactions to put the payments through, but mix all the coins together before they actually go through. And that seems to me like it would be a fun way to be able to do Bitcoin payments in person at one of these kind of big conferences or whatever, but also mixing the coins that are going through. I don't know if it's a great approach from an anonymity perspective, but I just thought it would be a fun project that I would be entertained to use myself. So those are a few ideas of things that you can do with a Raspberry Pi. And if you do end up doing something with your Raspberry Pi, please let me know about it. I'd love to hear what you're working on. In general, if there are viewers that are working on projects, I would love to hear about them. I'm fascinated to know about what kind of stuff people are working on. Myself, right now, I'm trying to wrap up some research related to a particular mixing service, looking at the privacy of it or the anonymity of it. And hopefully I'll be done with that soon, and I can go public with the findings. Also want to give a shout out to Chris Pacia, who built a Google an app for Android devices, and what it allows you to do is basically like a multi-sig two-factor kind of approach to storing your Bitcoins in the wallet. So you can store Bitcoins on a computer and then require access to your mobile device through an app to actually sign off on any transactions before the Bitcoins can get sent out. I think that's a great idea. I haven't had a chance to look at it directly, but it's just such a fantastic idea, and I see that he's been getting lots of positive feedback about this. So definitely take a look at that. Maybe I'll throw a link to that in the description as well if people are interested. And so I do believe that will be it for our live version of Dark News today. Thank you so much for watching. Again, feel free to support the show. If you have questions that you'd like to have answered for next week's show, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. That's at Dark News Show on Twitter, or you can also use the hashtag on Dark News. And I hope you have a fun and safe and anonymous week ahead of you. Thanks so much for watching.